Thank you for staying with us. You're still watching The Breakfast on Plus TV Africa. Our first hot topic says World Bank urges CBN to stay the course on inflation control. The World Bank has advised the Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, to continue its efforts to control inflation, highlighting the importance of agricultural reforms and adjusting trade policies. Dr. Samir Matta, senior economist for Nigeria at the World Bank, acknowledged the high cost of reforms, particularly in fuel and FX subsidies, but emphasized their necessity for Nigeria's economic stability. The World Bank also stressed the need for social protection measures to protect vulnerable groups from the impact of inflation. Dr. Christian Ebeke from the IMF echoed this, calling for a better coordination between fiscal and monetary policies to mitigate the redistribution effects of recent reforms, especially on the most vulnerable populations. Both institutions praised the CBN and fiscal authorities for reducing deficit monetization and improving coordination, marking progress towards economic stabilization. Mata further urged and continued fiscal consolidation and social programs such as cash transfers to support the most affected citizens during this challenging period. Joining us this morning is Muktar Mohammed, is an economist. Good morning, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Good morning to you. So we're talking about staying the course. Of course, there's been a lot of structural reforms in Nigeria. In fact, with the rising inflation, it has had an impact on many businesses. In fact, standard of living in Nigeria, to be honest. And these are the reforms that most of them were being introduced or being advised to us by the World Bank, the IMF, and they told us this is what you should do, even though it doesn't necessarily work that way because we have our own peculiarities as a nation. However, the CBN adhered to it, and here we are at the moment. Of course, fuel subsidy is gone. We're looking at, FX, which the exchange to the dollar has become really, really high. The naira depreciation also had a major impact, and now we're still talking about electricity tariff for Band A customers, telecoms tariff as well. So many things, inflation. For you, do you think that the structural reforms have worked so far for the World Bank to be advising us, telling us we should stay the course?
Thank you once again. I think if you look at that World Bank advice, I don't think it's just a cautious advice that you have to stay the course. And in staying that course, he's tried to tell them what he thinks they should do. If you look at that World Bank, let me quote in the World Bank economist in Nigeria. He said they must create the link between the rural and urban area. They must improve agricultural yield. Now, let me take that to when you look at talking about the link between the urban and rural area, then you are not talking about infrastructure. You are talking about road network. You are talking about movement of goods and services. That the CBN cannot do. That's the physical side, and that is why the IMF country manager was talking about synergy between the physical and the monetary side. So you can see that link there already. That is for the urban area. When you look at they talk about agricultural yield again, now that is also in the physical side, because again, why are we not getting that improvement in supply side? Is insecurity, especially in most of Nigeria agricultural hub, like in the northeast, north central. We are still having those challenges that have to do with banditry and terrorism. That again is a challenge. Then you go further, as you talked about the trade policy, which you mentioned. And if you look at that, when you talked about the trade policy, it talks about adjustment in tariff, for especially in terms of production. He said, look, the way to address that is to have local production improve. That will take longer time because that will not happen overnight. And then he said, for us to have be able to manage it, we need to begin to look at tariff adjustment. And that is what we talked about it sometime last year. The government policy on the tariff, where there's going to be suspension of tariffs on household items. That did not see the light of the day. So when you look at what the World Bank and the IMF is talking, you realize that they are only saying, look, you are at the cost, but for you to deal with this inflation, for you to make any headway, there must be a synergy between the monetary and the physical side. You could see the IMF country manager also talking in the area of FX stability. He also talked about in the area of in terms of liquidity in the system, not having too much liquidity. Even if you have to use the cash transfer, it must be targeted and it must not be misused. So all this, if you look at it, is not in the hands generally of the CBN. So what you're saying is that CBN keep doing what you have to do to bring down inflation, but the oasis in terms of that lies in the physical side. And towards the end, he said something again in that report. He said the physical side policy can it be easily felt by the people, immediately felt by the people, than the monetary side, because the monetary side always take time. But the physical side, you come up today, you say, okay, you know what? We've removed tariff on agricultural item, household items that are coming into Nigeria, agricultural machinery that are coming into Nigeria. Immediately, you see the response in terms of food price goes down, the cost of living comes down. But for the monetary side, there are other angles to it. Or you hike in rate, you have to wait for the first rate to settle down before you begin. So I think the onus still lie on the monetary side to do a lot compared to what the physical side are doing.
Thank you so much for that.
I mean, it lies in the physical side to do a more than what the monetary side is doing.
Yeah. So in my own experience, when things go up in Nigeria, you never really see them come down. So to say, oh, the cost of goods and services are going to be reduced because there is one policy that comes, I've never really seen that happen so far in my years of living. Yes, in my years of living in Nigeria.
Petrol came down.
Sir?
Petrol came down.
Yeah, but so when you say petrol came down, of course, people were still charging as high for transportation. Prices of goods and services were still the same. Instead, they will tell you that every day it goes up, regardless of petrol coming down. So I've never really seen that significant impact whereby something goes up and it comes down again in Nigeria, in my own experience. But what they're saying, of course, it affects, the low-income earners, because they're the people who are obviously, they have to spend so much on transportation. They have to spend so much on just putting food on their tables. With this now, one of the things they said was obviously cash transfers during this challenging period. I remember sometime last year, we spoke about 75,000 naira to some households. I don't know how that happened. I don't know if that really saw the light of day. But is that even something that we should be doing? Shouldn't we be looking for something that affects or that impacts all Nigerians instead of a select few having to put cash transfers to them? And after that cash transfer, what happens next? That's a big question, because even if I transfer 75,000 naira to one household, after they've spent that money, what happens next? How do they still, sustain themselves? Am I going to be sending them money every single month? Is that how this is going to work? And of course, I'm sure that's not what we should be looking at. What are some things, some policies that you think will be able to cushion, this impact of inflation in Nigeria if the World Bank is still advising us to stay the course?
I think it's interventions, and cash transfer is part of the intervention. But even if I personally don't think it works very well in Nigeria because of the political side of it, it works in developed nations that have data. Data of what people earn, then you are able to know who is the rich and who is the poor. You just need to go back and look at the corruption in the humanitarian agency before now, how they try to allocate monies to themselves, and even the former minister is still being tried. So, and the former minister, the Rume Buhari administration is being tried. Betty that came in after Buhari administration was also suspended. So you realize that cash transfer itself is a conduit fight again for corruption. And sometimes when this cash are finding their ways into the states or the local government or whatever, you must belong to a political group to be able to benefit from it. You have to belong to a particular person for your name to be put in there before you can get those cash transfers. So which I think that's why I personally think that cash transfer is not working. And you said, what is that policy? I think what policy we need to begin to look at is the long-term policy. Whether it's going to take time, then we need to look at how we can begin to help them, especially if you talk about farmer. How can we improve their yield? How can we begin to give them fertilizer at a discounted price? How do we go about that? Rather than using middlemen, how do you go about that? It has worked before when the former, the Minister of Agriculture, the current governor of African Development Bank, When he was there, we saw how that worked also, the foreign president of African Development Bank. We saw how that works also. Can't it work again so that you will not be able to subsidize costs for farmers? For them, then you have to improve security. We talked about providing local security, providing security, programming food for farmers to go to farm. That has to be done too. Then we also have to look at the tariff policy, because I keep saying that about 70 to 80% of what we consume comes outside the shore of this country. And even when it doesn't come outside the shore of the country, the machineries that are used for production come outside the shore of this country. Well, how can we begin to see how those costs in those machinery, cost in those goods can come down by reduction in tariff? That it will be the game changer. Going back to say, oh, that can only be implemented through the tax reform, I think it's just being political, trying to make sure that I put everything under the tax reform. We see what happened in the US of recent. Executive orders are executive order. They supersede any other. If the president says, I'm going to sign an executive order that food tariff should be reduced, it should come in immediately after the signing of that. Not saying, oh, constitutionally is bad, custom is waiting for Ministry of It's an executive order. So we need a lot of that to be able to drive through some of this short-term policy to begin to see results and then improve upon it in the long term so that we can have sustainable. Nigerian challenge that actually be when we come up with good policy, it tends to stay for a while. Then if they come an external shock, we are back to where we are. Why are we always having that? Because once we take care of the short term, we don't begin to build towards the long-term challenge that might occur. So that for me is the major challenge. But security needs to improve, agricultural yield too, because if you look at the data from Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, most of the inflation that we are suffering from is food inflation. So how can we get food out? How can government forget about the trailer load of rice, bag of rice that they promised us, and we have not seen that? Let's all begin to see tangible effort in addressing food security. That for me will be the game changer.
Okay, so let's look at the role that the exchange rate, stability has obviously, has to play with this. For instance, there was a report this morning that says about 1.82 billion naira was spent by Nigerians to pay tuition fees in foreign universities. And of course, this has been called as a national embarrassment because why are we spending so much? And a lot of people are looking for this, for the dollar, for the British pounds to be able to pay for their, their healthcare services, to be able to pay for their tuition fees. But one issue, obviously, is the depreciation of the naira. And that has obviously, caused some form of inflation, to be honest. But how can the CBN handle these pressures right now? Because if the World Bank is saying you have to stay the course on this inflation control, one of the issues we have is the exchange rate. How can they handle the pressure to ensure that Nigerians are not just feeling the brunt of it?
Unfortunately, again, it's not in their hands. And again, let me address one issue where we say it's a national disgrace. I don't think it's a national disgrace. If you look at a country like India, today their foreign reserve is over $700 billion. It's largely driven by intellectual export that Indians that go outside the shop, Indian to school, and they are in turn remitting money to their government. That has stabilized their exchange rate for over 10 years because of this. So definitely education itself is an investment. So I don't see that as a major challenge, whether, is it a national disgrace? Not a national disgrace. Even the Chinese today, what they did to become to be where they are today was to send a lot of their students to the United States of America to learn how the US does their own, and then came back to China and begin to improve upon that. I think where it becomes a disgrace or where it becomes a challenge for me is when there is no opportunity for them to manifest those skills that they have learned outside the shore of the country, in our own country, because of policies, somersault, bottleneck, and others. So that, for me, that's the only challenge. But to say 1 point something million on tuition fee is a national disgrace, I don't totally agree with that. Then secondly, to the CBN, I think the CBN needs to do a lot. But again, it's like I said, it's not in their hand. We're talking about how do we earn revenue. Nigeria, how do we get revenue? We get revenue for crude oil, sir. We get revenue also how do we earn FX into our economy? Crude oil, sir. Foreign direct investment, foreign portfolio investment, and also remittance from Nigeria and the diaspora. Those are the four means or trade. But in terms of trade, you know, our major trade is crude oil. If you look at the agricultural sector, even when they add about 90 to 98% to the GDP, you realize that in terms of value, in terms of dollar transaction, it's low compared to the 3% that the oil and gas sector, the petroleum sector we add to the economy. So we need to improve on production. Now the government have targeted about 2.07 million barrel per day, and OPEC has given them a total of 1.5 million barrel, and then local production will take care of the other ones. I think if we are able to stabilize that, that will bring in more effects into the economy. Foreign direct investors, foreign portfolio investors will not come to your market if you have a fluctuating exchange rate, a volatile exchange. So we need to improve on the exchange rate. We need to stabilize the exchange rate. If the governor of CBN is saying that Nigeria exchange rate should be at 1,400, we need to work to stabilize that. But it's an accurate stance, because now in working to stabilize that, you need to earn FX. And that is why we still go back to production. Especially a major area of FX is crude oil. Now we need to improve on that. Now, even in improving on that, like you just pointed out, school fees alone about 1 point something. That is like 1.8 trillion. That's largely taken care of through the retail side. So we need to improve liquidity in the retail side to have stability in there. So that is what the CBN should be working at. Nigerian remitters in the diaspora, they have come up with a lot of product. Hopefully this year we'll begin to see the road shows for Nigerians in the diaspora to invest in this product. But again, there will be a little bit of challenge, you know, the immigration issue in the United States of America. That might have impact on remittance back home, especially for Nigerians that are undocumented immigrants, that are, even if they're sending money back home. So those are the challenges. So the only place that the CBN has a little bit of control, or the Nigerian government have a little bit of control, is in the sale of crude oil. We need to improve on that.
Okay. So finally, of course, Nigerians are expecting, or they want a better country and they want a better economy. So how long do we have to stay for this? And what are some signals that we can say that, yes, you know, inflation is being under control, things are working, the structural reforms that have been put in place, we'll start to see the dividends of it all. How long do we need to tighten our belts? Because, of course, this has been since 2023. We're in 2025 right now. Things don't seem to be getting better. Prices of goods and services are increasing every single day. How long do we need to stay on this course?
Well, how long we need to tighten our belt? I wish I could answer that question. I think we still have to tighten our belt. Reforms doesn't happen overnight, like what the World Bank and the IMF have made us to say. No, like in the report. I think it's going to take a while. Or have we seen any sign? Well, you could say that there'll be a little bit of sign if you look at the exchange rate. At the point was 1,900. Now we are doing about 1,600, 1,650. That for me is one of those areas that we need to do more this year to see that stability. The other side, again, is in terms of our road show, especially in terms of Eurobond and others. We've seen how much these investors are scrambling for our bonds, though that you could attribute to our high yield that we are giving. But that also means that investors still have confidence in our economy. So that is the positivity there. We need to, but other areas that is still making like a challenge, we need to improve food security. And food security can only improve through security, especially for lives and property. So we need to do more on that. We have to also say the army are doing their best that they can. But again, more need to be done to make sure that we can get security in these areas that are hub for agriculture production.
Thank you so much, Muktar. It's been a pleasure having you. I hope that they listen and, you know, all of these things that you've said, they start to put it in place, because we need to do a whole lot if we want to whip up our economy. And we hope that very soon, it would not be too long that we have to tighten our belts for, but we started to see the dividends. Thank you so much for coming. It's always a pleasure having you on our program. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Have a wonderful day. All right, I'm speaking with Muktar Mohammed, is an economist, and we've just been looking at the fact that the World Bank has urged the CBN to stay the course on inflation control. We'll go on a short break now. When we return, we'll be speaking on the NADF pledges to revolutionize Nigeria's agricultural sector for economic transformation. Please stay with us.